The Invisible Woman. In a city that never stops, where people rush by without looking, there was someone who also went unnoticed every single day. Her name was Doña Lucia, gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, hands marked by time, and a quiet gait, like someone no longer in a hurry to get anywhere. A widow for many years, her children lived far away, and the few neighbors who knew her called her the Lady with the Cloth Bag. Every day, around 5 p.m., Lucia would leave her house with a cloth bag in her hands. It wasn't to go to the market, nor the pharmacy. It was just a habit, or at least it seemed that way. No one knew for sure where she was going, but she knew. That was the most important hour of her day. She lived alone in a simple little house, one of those with a cement yard, an old radio that played AM, and a huge fern hanging by the kitchen window. She lived on little, a modest pension, some savings kept in a cookie jar, and silence. But even in the silence, Lucia carried something few people saw, a restless heart. She didn't feel important, and, truth be told, it had been a long time since she felt seen. She didn't receive visitors, wasn't in photos, wasn't invited anywhere. It was as if the world had forgotten she was there. But even so, every day, without fail, she prepared a packed meal: fluffy rice, beans seasoned with fried garlic, a piece of roasted chicken, or a slice of boiled egg. Sometimes, if there was extra, an apple. Sometimes just bread and butter. It was simple food, but made with care. A care she didn't receive, but still made sure to offer. She never told anyone why. Maybe out of shame. Maybe because she thought no one would understand. But deep down, Lucia knew. It was the only moment of the day when she felt she still made a difference in the world, that she could still change something, even if it was just an empty stomach. And it was on a winter afternoon, exactly 12 years ago, that everything began. She was coming back from church when she saw, leaning against a graffitied wall, a boy, small, thin, dirty. He must have been about 6 or 7, but his gaze was old, too tired for someone so young. He held his own stomach with both hands, trying to hide the sound of hunger. Lucia stopped. She looked, and in that instant, the world fell silent. She could have walked past. That's what everyone else did. But something in her, perhaps a memory, perhaps the pain of a past she herself hid, made her turn back. She took the bread she was going to eat at home out of her bag and, without saying a word, gave it to the boy. He took it with suspicion. He didn't thank her. But he ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days. In that instant, something ignited within her. A thread of light, perhaps. And it was there, in that first silent gesture, that a story began that would change 2 lives forever. Lucia didn't know his name, nor he hers. But from that day on, she started going back to that same wall, with a packed meal, with bread, with juice, with whatever she had. Not out of charity, but because for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. And so the invisible bond was born between the woman forgotten by the world and the boy forgotten by luck. The first encounter. It was a cloudy afternoon. One of those when the wind blows stronger than usual, lifting dry leaves and old memories. The sky threatened rain, and people hurried along the cracked sidewalks of the city center. Amidst honks, footsteps, and haste, no one noticed what was in the corner of the square. No one, except Doña Lucia. There he was, the same boy, sitting on the grimy ground, his back against a wall covered in torn advertisements and faded graffiti. He stared fixedly at the ground, as if the entire world weighed on his too small shoulders. He wore a frayed coat, 2 sizes too big for him, and shoeless sneakers. His dirty hands clutched a crumpled, empty soda can. His stomach rumbled so loudly that even the pigeons seemed bothered. Donna Lucia stopped a few feet from him. Her heart raced, as if she were before something sacred. People around them passed by, averting their gaze. Some frowned, others quickened their pace. But Lucia stood there, watching. It wasn't just hunger. It was abandonment. It was pain. It was that raw loneliness she knew so well herself. She took a deep breath, picked up her cloth bag, and walked towards him with firm yet gentle steps. The boy noticed her approach and recoiled. His eyes, dark and watchful, fixed on her with the mix of fear and distrust of someone who had been hit by life more than they had received kindness. "Hey, son," Lucia said, her voice low, almost as if asking permission. He didn't answer. He didn't blink. She slowly crouched down, took a small plastic container from her bag, and opened the lid. The smell of warm food escaped into the cold air. Rice, beans, and a piece of roasted chicken. "It's warm," she murmured, extending the container with both hands, as if offering a gift. The boy hesitated. He looked at the container. He looked at her, his eyes still suspicious. But his hands trembled. Slowly, he took the container. He held it to his chest, like someone guarding a treasure, and he began to eat, slowly, without taking his eyes off her. Each spoonful was a battle won against hunger, against pain, against the fear of trusting. Lucia stayed there, crouched, observing in silence. She said nothing more. She asked no questions. She didn't want to know his name or where he came from. That didn't matter. What mattered was that moment, that first gesture, that small, invisible bond beginning to form between 2 lost souls. When he finished, he closed the container without a word. He handed it back with a look different. It wasn't gratitude yet, but it was no longer fear. She smiled. "I'll be back tomorrow, okay?" He didn't answer, but he also didn't look away, and that was enough. Donna Lucia stood up with a slight crack in her knees and went on her way. Her step seemed lighter. There was something different in the air, as if that simple act of sharing a meal had filled a void she hadn't even known existed. That day, she didn't tell anyone what happened, but when she got home, she prepared the rice more carefully than ever. For the first time in years, she felt her food had a destination, that her life had a purpose. In the square, the boy looked at the horizon. Perhaps he expected another difficult day. Perhaps he expected nothing. But something, deep in his chest, had changed. Perhaps for the first time, he was waiting for someone. The next day arrived with a timid sun hiding behind the clouds. Donna Lucia woke up earlier than usual, even without an alarm clock. There was a restlessness in her chest she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was anxiety, perhaps hope, perhaps both. In the kitchen, she prepared lunch as she always did, but this time with more care. She meticulously washed the rice, seasoned the beans with golden garlic, and set aside the best piece of chicken from the day before. She cut it into strips, arranged everything in a small, lidded container, and placed it inside the same cloth bag. She added a piece of bread wrapped in a cloth napkin, just as she used to when her children took snacks to school. She said nothing, not even to herself, but she knew exactly where she was going. At 5 in the afternoon, there she was, walking along the same sidewalks, avoiding the same potholes, greeting the same unresponsive faces. As she turned the corner of the square, her heart quickened. Would he be there? He was. sitting in the same spot, legs crossed, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed. But this time, as he saw her approaching, he looked up and stared at her. There was no smile, no greeting, but there was no fear either. It was as if he knew she would come, as if he had waited all day for this. She approached, opened the bag, and took out the container with the same care. She sat beside him, this time without hesitation. She handed him the food. He took it. He ate. Silently. Donna Lucia didn't say a word. She just watched, like a mother watching her child eat after a difficult day. And so it went. The next day she returned, and the next, and the day after that too. Without fail, rain or shine, Lucia appeared, always at the same time, always with the same gesture, always with the same simple, warm food. She never expected a thank you. She never asked questions. And he, in turn, also didn't speak. But his eyes spoke for him, increasingly alive, increasingly human. Sometimes she brought a blanket. Other times, a piece of fruit. When she could, she left a small note with sweet words, even knowing he might not be able to read. But that didn't matter. It was the care that counted. Over time, people started to notice that repeated scene. Some wrinkled their noses, others ignored it. "Those kinds of people just want to take advantage," they murmured. But Donna Lucia didn't hear. Or rather, she heard but she didn't care, because there was something in that routine that healed her. Feeding that boy wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a daily reminder that she was still capable of loving, of caring, of being useful, of being seen, even if it was by a pair of small, dirty eyes that waited for her every day without saying anything. And the most curious part? She still didn't know his name. He never asked hers either. But they knew, about each other, the essential. They knew they existed. And in that world of forgetting, haste, and indifference, that was already more than many people had. As the weeks passed, she began to notice small changes. He was a little cleaner. He slept with the blanket. He had new flip-flops, probably donated by someone. His eyes held less fear. His face, though still serious, seemed calmer. Donna Lucia never asked why he was on the street, nor how he ended up there. She knew that certain pains didn't need to be relived to be respected. She just wanted to ensure that, at least once a day, he knew he wasn't alone. And so, day after day, without contracts, without promises, without words, a deep and silent connection was born between them. The gesture became a habit, and the habit became... The years pass in silence. Time, as always, passed without asking permission, and with it came changes. In the streets, in the buildings, in the seasons. The square was renovated, the trees grew, cars changed models. But there was one thing that remained untouched throughout the years. That silent routine between Donna Lucia and the boy from the street. What began as a gesture of compassion became a part of life, an invisible bond that united two souls on the margins of the world. There were no promises, no long conversations. It was as if that simple act of bringing a packed meal every day was enough to sustain something greater than either of them could understand. And so, months passed. Then, years. 12 of them. Yes, 12 years. 12 winters, 12 summers, 12 lonely Christmases, and 12 forgotten birthdays. While the world spun, they remained there, faithful to that simple ritual that no one saw, or if they did, didn't comprehend. The boy grew up before her eyes, and she aged before his. Donna Lucia's hair turned whiter, her hands more tremulous. Her legs ached a little more with each walk to the square, but she never stopped going, not once. He, meanwhile, gradually transformed. His hardened gaze gained tenderness. His frail body gave way to broader shoulders. The boy became a young man, and in time he stopped merely accepting the food. He began to help carry the bag, put away the containers, and wait standing. One day, he grabbed a cloth and cleaned the bench before she sat down. And that, coming from him, was like a silent embrace. Still, few words were exchanged. A thank you here, a watch your step there. But their eyes remained the most faithful messengers. And the silence, oh, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was complicit. While others went about their lives, they created their own world. A world where time passed slowly, where the city's noises seemed not to reach, where a warm meal meant affection, and a piece of bread wrapped in a napkin could be the deepest gesture of love. In these years, Lucia faced severe flus, aching bones, and even the loss of a dear neighbor. But even on difficult days, she dragged herself to the kitchen, prepared the food with trembling hands, and headed to the square. If it weren't for him, perhaps she wouldn't even leave the house anymore. But that commitment, silent, almost sacred, was the spark that kept her soul alight. She never told her children what she did. They barely called, too busy with their own routines, and perhaps they wouldn't understand. She never told the priest, nor her church friends. That was just theirs, just hers and the boy's, who wasn't quite a boy anymore. She still didn't know his name, and he, apparently, never asked hers either. But they knew everything that mattered. Lucia saw in his eyes the strength of someone fighting to survive in a world that ignored him, and he saw in her the care of someone who, even without much, offered everything. And so, year after year, day after day, that small gesture, so common, so simple, transformed into an extraordinary story. Without photos, without records, without applause, just two people united by what is purest: presence, consistency, the silent love of someone who chooses, every day, to care for someone the world chose to forget. And while everyone thought Dona Lucia was invisible, there was someone who saw her every single day, and that, for her, was everything. The disappearance. That morning, everything seemed the same. The brewed coffee, the sound of the spoon clinking against the cup, the old radio crackling with some news. Dona Lucia was more tired than usual, but she ignored it. Age was taking its toll, but her late afternoon commitment was sacred. She didn't even need to think. Her hands already moved to the rhythm of routine. Rice, beans, chicken, bread, all in the same small container, all with the same care. By 4:30 p.m. she was ready, scarf around her neck, cloth bag in hand. She left the gate ajar as she always did and headed towards the square. But that day, there was something in the air, a colder breeze, a strange silence. Her footsteps echoed more than usual, and, when she arrived at her destination, she felt an emptiness she couldn't explain. The bench was there, the trees swayed as always, but he wasn't. The spot where he used to wait was empty. No trace, no sign. Dona Lucia stopped. She looked around, waited a few minutes, then a few more. Half an hour passed. An hour. Nothing. The city went on as if nothing had happened. Children played on the other side of the square. A couple argued softly. An ice cream vendor rang his rusty bell. Everything revolved normally, except Lucia's heart. She returned home without delivering the meal, for the first time in 12 years. That night, she didn't sleep. In the following days, she repeated the path, at the same time, with the same container. But the bench remained empty. The silence was different now. It hurt more. It echoed in the walls of her soul. For weeks, she tried not to imagine the worst. Maybe he had found something better. Maybe he had left with a relative. Maybe... But Lucia knew. Her heart, so accustomed to that presence, felt that something was wrong. In the third week without news, she decided to discreetly ask the local vendors. No one knew. One said he had seen him around a few days earlier. Another thought he had been taken by social services. But these were just suppositions, nothing certain, nothing concrete. He had simply disappeared, vanished into the world like so many others, without warning, without goodbye. And she was left there, alone again. The meal growing cold in her hands, her heart aching in her chest. The city began to swallow the invisible woman once more, but this time it hurt more. Because, after 12 years, she was no longer just a lonely old lady with a cloth bag. She was someone who waited, someone who cared, someone who had formed deep bonds with a stranger and now felt the silent pain of absence. In the following days, she tried to pretend it didn't hurt. She continued cooking. She continued passing through the square. She continued looking at the bench, but he didn't come back. And Donna Lucia, even without shedding a tear, began to feel the world fade again. It was as if she had lost a child, but in this case, without a birth certificate, without a wake, without explanation, just an emptiness where a shy smile used to be. Time, which once seemed an ally, now dragged the days with cruelty. Each sunset without the boy was a new wound. And even without knowing his name, without knowing his story, Donna Lucia felt as if a part of her had been taken with him. Because when you love in silence for so long, the absence screams. And there, before that empty bench, she learned that the worst kind of loss is the one that comes without a goodbye. Solitude returns. The days that followed were like an old movie on repeat. The same street, the same bench, the same silence. But now, everything felt heavier. His absence wasn't just a physical void. It was like an echo that permeated the square, the house, Donna Lucia's very soul. She kept going. She took the packed meal, sat for a few minutes, watched the leaves dancing in the wind, the dogs crossing the square, the cars rushing by. But the bench beside her remained empty, and no one even imagined what that white-haired lady with the cloth bag was feeling. The loneliness, which she had learned to tame before, returned with force. Only now it was different. Left a cry. They were silent, discreet tears, like everything she had experienced with him. But they were, before, she felt alone in the world. Now, she felt she had lost a piece of the world she herself had helped rebuild. The walls of her house once again seemed cold. The pots felt too big for one person. The radio played the same old songs, but none brought comfort. She slept less, ate little. She spent more time sitting on the porch, looking at the gate, as if, somehow, he might appear there, with that same silent gaze, with the same gentle hunger that made her feel needed. At church, they asked if she was all right. She smiled, as always. "Just a little tired," she said, but inside her, there was a hurricane of longing and frustration. For years, Lucia was ignored by most. She was just another lonely elderly woman, invisible to the world's eyes. But that boy, that stranger with a shy voice and deep eyes, saw her, not with words, but with presence, and his presence was enough. With his disappearance, she realized how much that bond had become part of her identity. It wasn't just an act of charity, it was a connection, a purpose, an anchor. Now, without him, she felt adrift. One afternoon, returning from the square, she entered her house, set the bag on the floor, and sat on the sofa. She stayed there for hours. No radio, no kettle on the stove, just the ticking of the clock filling the void. And there, finally, she allowed her seer. They carried the weight of an entire decade of care, of contained affection, of unspoken words. That night was long, but at dawn, her eyes still swollen, Lucia got up. And she did what she always did, washed her face, tied her hair, lit the stove. She made rice, beans, chicken. She put everything in the same packed meal container and left the house. Perhaps he would never return. Perhaps he had gone forever. But as long as her heart pulsed, she would keep going. She would keep bringing food, love, hope. Because even when everything seems lost, when silence returns to dominate, there is still strength in the gesture. There is value in consistency. And she knew that somehow, somewhere, that boy, now a man, carried within him the memory of what they shared. And that kept her from giving up. Even alone, she continued, because when love is true, it withstands even the cruelest silence. An unexpected visit. On that rainy afternoon, Dona Lucia wasn't feeling well. Her blood pressure had fluctuated, her body was weak, and the doctor had recommended complete rest. For the first time in years, she didn't leave her house with her cloth bag. She lay in bed looking out the window, with the still warm, packed meal untouched on the table. The park bench, likely wet and empty, would wait for her, just as she had waited for him every day for months. The rain fell all day. It hammered on the roof tiles, streamed down the gutters, and washed over the sidewalks as if cleansing the city of everything old, sad, or forgotten. It was late afternoon when someone knocked on her gate. She found it strange. She wasn't expecting visitors. Her children rarely showed up, and neighbors usually just waved from afar. She slowly got up, put on her slippers, pulled her shawl over her shoulders, and went to the door. The rain had subsided, but the sky was still cloudy. As she opened the gate, her heart skipped a beat for a second. There he was, standing, wet, tall, with the same gaze but now fuller, more a man, more whole, and with a shy smile at the corner of his lips. Dona Lucia put her hand to her mouth, unable to say a word. He also stood there, motionless for a few moments, as if he didn't know whether to enter or ask permission, until he broke the silence. "I thought it was my turn to bring the food today." She laughed, cried. Her legs almost gave way, and he instinctively held her by the shoulders. They were close, closer than ever. Her eyes now clearly saw the man he had become. A firm gaze, simple but clean clothes, and in his hands, a small bag with fresh bread and a thermos. "Sorry I disappeared," he said, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't say goodbye. I was taken in by a social project. I was admitted to a shelter. Then I got a spot in a training program. I learned to read, to write. I worked. I saved some money. And now I managed to find you." Dona Lucia just shook her head like someone trying to believe what her eyes already knew was true. "I didn't know your name," he said, "but I never forgot you, not a single day. The rice with garlic, the bread in the napkin, the way you looked at me, as if I mattered. And I never truly thanked you." She finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "You didn't have to. I always knew." He smiled, his eyes welling up. "My name is Raphael." She replied with a sparkle in her eye, "And mine is Lucia. But I think you always knew too, right?" They laughed, a light, healing laugh. That night they sat at the table. They ate together for the first time. He served, she listened, and between words, smiles, and memories stitched together by time, they rewove the threads of a story that neither silence, nor abandonment, nor the streets could erase. What began with a warm, packed meal was now a reunion of souls, and life, once again, showed that when love is persistent, even the improbable kneels before hope. Revelations at the table. Sitting at that simple table, between plates of warm food and the soft light of the lamp, Raphael began to tell his story. Words that had been held for years finally found a voice, like rain that insisted on falling after a long drought. He explained that after disappearing from the square, he was taken in by a social project that aimed to help children experiencing homelessness. There he gained a new world, education, care, and for the first time, the chance to dream beyond the next meal. But it wasn't easy. Raphael spoke of sleepless nights, doubts, the fear of not being enough, of failing. He recalled moments when the longing for Dona Lucia squeezed his chest like an invisible fist. "I wanted to come back," he said, "but I knew I needed to learn to walk on my own first." He talked about school, where he faced suspicious glances and prejudice, but also made friends who helped him see that he was worth more than the streets that were once his home. He spoke of the jobs he had, from the simplest ones to the one that finally gave him stability, a job in a small bakery, where he learned to bake bread with a smile on his face and hands calloused from effort. And he shared the dreams that began to blossom within him, to finish his studies, to help other children like himself, and of course, to find the woman who never forgot him. Dona Lucia listened, deeply moved. Every word was a bridge connecting the past to the present, uniting the boy he was to the man he had become. She spoke little, but with every gesture she showed pride and love, a love that needed no explanations or diplomas, just the simple, raw truth of life. That night, amidst stories and tears, they understood that what they had experienced wasn't just a coincidence or an isolated act of kindness. It was a deep connection, made of small actions, patience, and most importantly, faith in one another. When Raphael stood up to help clear the dishes, Dona Lucia smiled and said, "You changed my life as much as I changed yours." He held her hand and replied, "Not just yours, Dona Lucia. You changed my view of the world." They knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, they felt they weren't alone. Because sometimes, what seems like a simple gesture can become the light that guides an entire life. And that table, in that modest house, became the symbol of a future that, despite all difficulties, was being built. A new beginning. After that night of revelations, something changed forever in Dona Lucia's and Raphael's lives. The connection that once seemed fragile, built between packed meals and silences, became the solid foundation of a new chapter, full of possibilities and hope. In the days that followed, Raphael not only resumed visiting Dona Lucia, but became a constant presence in her home. The cloth bag that once carried food for an invisible boy now brought stories, laughter, and the promise of a better future for both of them. Raphael, with his renewed energy, helped with household chores, learning the small kitchen secrets from Dona Lucia, while she, in turn, allowed herself to be swept up by the enthusiasm of the young man who, little by little, was finding his place in the world again. They created a new routine, different, happier, more vibrant. She, who had lived so long in the shadow of loneliness, now had a reason to smile every morning. He, who knew the cold of the streets and the emptiness of abandonment began to build a story of overcoming and belonging. But this new beginning was not without its challenges. Raphael needed to sort out documents, regularize his situation, go back to school, and find a job that would allow him to escape the cycle of uncertainty. Dona Lucia, with her limited resources, helped as much as she could, while the local community, touched by their story, began to offer support. Gradually, what was once just an individual act of kindness transformed into a movement. Neighbors started donating clothes, books, and even their time to help Raphael study. One day, while walking through the square where everything had begun, Raphael looked at Dona Lucia and said, "You know, I never imagined that packed meal would change my life so much, and yours too." She smiled, her eyes shining. "Life is full of those surprises, my son. Sometimes, we just need to be willing to care." Raphael returned to school with a determination that surprised everyone. He enrolled in technical courses, attended lectures, and discovered talents he never imagined he possessed. Dona Lucia, who once felt invisible, became known as the woman who, against all odds, never gave up. Her simple gesture of feeding a boy on the street echoed through the community, inspiring many to act with love and compassion. The young man, now with a steady job, began to give back, helping other vulnerable children. The cycle of solidarity that seemed so fragile proved resilient, capable of transforming lives. And there, in that modest house, where once there was silence and longing, now there was music, laughter, and plans. It was a new beginning, because in the end, the true transformation wasn't just in the food that was offered, but in the love that was born between two people who, despite the circumstances, chose to believe in the power of hope. The legacy of a transformed life. As months and then years passed, what began as a simple act of compassion grew into something far greater than Dona Lucia and Raphael could ever have imagined. That bond between a humble old woman and a street boy not only transformed their lives, but touched the entire community around them. Raphael became a living example of the power of hope and persistence. He completed his studies, secured a stable job, and, more than that, committed himself to the future. He founded a small NGO dedicated to helping vulnerable children and young people, inspiring them to believe they can change their own stories, just as he changed his. Dona Lucia, in turn, became known as the Mother of the Square, the one who never gave up, who believed, and who nourished not only the bodies, but also the souls of those in need. Her seemingly simple gesture became an inspiration to many, a symbol that small actions can create enormous waves of transformation. They never forgot the hardships, the cold nights, and the hunger. But now those moments were part of a conquered past, a narrative of victory and love, and above all, an example to be followed. What was most touching was seeing how their relationship remained genuine, based on respect, affection, and true friendship. They were family, not because they shared blood, but because they chose to be together, to support each other, and to grow side by side. At a community event, Raphael took the stage to tell his story. With a steady voice, he said, "I was just a lost boy on the street, without direction and without hope. But an old woman saw me, fed me, believed in me. She didn't just change my life, she changed the world around me. That is the power of true love." The audience applauded, moved. Dona Lucia, sitting in the front row, wiped away tears streaming down her face with a simple handkerchief. She knew that this was the result of an entire decade of dedication, sacrifice, and faith in others. In that moment, they both understood that their legacy wasn't in material possessions, but in the lives touched, the opportunities created, and the love shared. What began with a packed meal given to a helpless boy became a story of redemption, courage, and transformation. Proof that even in the most difficult circumstances, human beings are capable of bringing out the best in others and in themselves. And that, in the end, true wealth lies in giving, in caring, in believing. Because that is the force that moves the world, the love that never gives up.